I always thought I had a pretty good handle on life. A stable job as a software engineer, a comfortable apartment in San Francisco, and a marriage that, while not perfect, seemed solid enough. But I guess life has a way of throwing curvy balls when you least expect it. Let me take you back to how this all began, a day that started like any other, but ended up turning my world upside down. It was a typical foggy morning in the city. Melissa, my wife, had already left for her job at the marketing firm. I was working from home as usual, my day planned out with meetings and code debugging. Our apartment, a quaint space with a view of the bustling streets below, was unusually quiet without her presence. As I was getting ready to dive into my work, I noticed something odd under our bed. It was a small, leather-bound book, partially hidden under the loose floorboard that we always kept meaning to fix, but never got around to. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it out. It was Melissa's diary. Now, I'm not the type to pry into someone's private thoughts, but something about the way it was hidden made me pause. I flipped through the pages, and that's when my world stopped. The diary detailed Melissa's secret meetings, not with clients or friends, but other men. The level of detail was staggering. Descriptions of dates, emotions, even intimate moments. I sat there, the diary in my hands, feeling a mix of disbelief and betrayal wash over me. How long had this been going on? Why would Melissa do this? Our marriage had its ups and downs, sure, but I never suspected she would step outside it. I tried to process it all. The diary entries ranged over several months, and the realization that my wife had been living this double life right under my nose was gut-wrenching. I felt like a fool, the last to know about the reality of my own marriage. I closed the diary, my mind racing with questions. Do I confront her right away? Do I gather more evidence? What do I even say? The trust I had in Melissa, in us, felt shattered. As I sat in our quiet apartment, surrounded by memories of a relationship that now felt like a lie, I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't just let this go. There had to be a confrontation. But first, I needed to figure out how to handle this bombshell. So Reddit, that's where my story begins. The day I found out my wife was cheating on me, and the day my quest for the truth and for what to do about it started. Stay tuned, because believe me, it gets even more complicated from here. Hey again, Reddit. Kenneth here. After finding Melissa's diary, my world was spinning. I couldn't just sit there with my emotions boiling over. I needed answers, hard evidence. So I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I started my own secret mission, gathering evidence to confront Melissa about her affairs. Here's how that chapter of my life unfolded. In the days following the discovery, I became obsessed with confirming the diary's revelations. I started looking back at the past months, sifting through our shared memories for any signs I might have missed. It was like watching a movie where you already know the plot twist, and suddenly all the subtle hints make sense. I remembered the late-night calls Melissa said were from her office, her sudden interest in new hobbies, and the weekends she spent visiting her parents. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started falling into place. The inconsistencies were there, hidden in plain sight. Then came the hardest part: gathering more evidence. I felt like a detective in my own home, trying to piece together the reality of my wife's double life. I checked bank statements for unusual expenses, looked for receipts, and even started paying attention to her routine and the way she dressed for work. One evening, I followed her. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but I had to see for myself. I watched from a distance as she met some guy in a cozy downtown restaurant. They were laughing, touching. It was more than just a friendly meetup. That sight, guys, it was like a punch in the gut. My Melissa with someone else. It was real, and it hurt like hell. I also started taking notes, keeping a log of her comings and goings, matching them with the entries in her diary. It was meticulous and emotionally draining work. I felt like a stranger in my own life, spying on my own wife. But with every new piece of evidence, my resolve hardened. I couldn't confront her without being absolutely sure. I couldn't risk her talking her way out of it with excuses. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't deny or twist. And as much as I was gathering evidence, I was also preparing myself emotionally. Each new discovery was a blow, but it also steeled me for the inevitable confrontation. I was building a case not just against Melissa's actions, but also against the life of lies we had been living. So there I was, Reddit, a regular guy turned amateur detective, uncovering the painful truth of my marriage bit by bit. And let me tell you, nothing prepares you for something like this. But I had to keep going. I needed to see this through for my own sanity. Stay tuned, because this rabbit hole goes deeper. And the confrontation, well, let's just say it was anything but ordinary. Hey Reddit, it's Kenneth again. So, where were we? Ah, yes, the aftermath of my newfound career as a detective in my own love story gone wrong. But let me tell you, gathering evidence was just one part of the ordeal. The real battle was happening inside me, a tornado of emotions that I could barely keep in check. Every day felt like walking through a storm. Anger, sadness, betrayal, these words don't even begin to cover what I was feeling. I was angry at Melissa for her deception, sad about the crumbling of our marriage, and felt utterly betrayed by the person I trusted the most. Sleep became a distant memory. I'd lie awake at night, replaying everything in my mind. What did I do wrong? Were there signs I ignored? It was like a never-ending loop of doubt and self-blame. My work started to suffer, and I found myself zoning out, lost in thoughts. That's when I realized I needed to talk to someone. Bottling up wasn't helping. I decided to confide in my closest friend, Mike. He's been my buddy since college, the kind of friend who's more like a brother. I remember that conversation vividly. We met at our usual spot, a small cafe downtown, away from the prying eyes of our regular haunts. The moment I started telling him everything, from the diary to my late-night sleuthing, I could see the shock on his face. "Man, I had no idea," he said, his eyes wide with disbelief. He listened, really listened, as I poured out everything. The anger, the pain, the sense of utter betrayal. Mike was a rock, not interrupting, just letting me vent. After I was done, he leaned back, rubbing his chin, a habit when he's deep in thought. "Ken, this is messed up, but you gotta confront her. You can't live like this, man. But do it smartly. Be calm, collected. Don't let your emotions get the better of you." His words made sense, but it was easier said than done. How do you stay calm when your world is falling apart? Mike suggested I seek professional advice, maybe talk to a counselor or a lawyer before making any moves. "Don't do anything rash. Think this through," he advised. That conversation with Mike was a lifeline. It didn't solve my problems, but it gave me a bit of clarity, a momentary respite from the chaos of my emotions. He was right. I couldn't let my emotions drive my actions. But that was a tall order, especially when every fiber of my being was screaming for some sort of action, some kind of retribution. So there I was, Reddit, caught in the eye of an emotional hurricane, trying to make sense of the senseless. My journey was far from over, and the hardest part was yet to come. Stay tuned, because what happened next was something I never could have prepared for. Hi again, Reddit. Kenneth here. After all the emotional chaos and nights of planning, it was time to face the music. I had to confront Melissa. But how? I needed a plan, a strategy that would leave no room for her to wriggle out of the truth. I wanted her to know that I knew, but more importantly, I needed to see her real reaction, unfiltered and genuine. I decided the best approach was to catch her off guard. I needed the element of surprise on my side to see her raw, unguarded response. It wouldn't be easy. Melissa was sharp, and if she sensed something amiss, she might put up her defenses. I needed to be subtle, yet direct. So I came up with a plan. I'd act normal for a few days, go about our routine as if nothing had changed. This part was tough, Reddit. Acting like everything was okay, talking and laughing with her, all the while knowing what I knew it felt like playing a role in a twisted play. During these days, I paid extra attention to her habits, her schedule. I noticed she'd been a bit distracted lately, probably due to her own guilt. I used this to my advantage. I told her I had to go on a sudden business trip for a couple of days, a believable lie, given my job. But instead of going on a trip, I stayed in the city at a friend's place. The plan was to return home unexpectedly the next evening, when she'd likely be feeling relaxed, thinking she had the apartment to herself. That evening, my heart was pounding as I made my way back to our apartment. The closer I got, the more the suspense built up. It felt like I was stepping into a showdown, the climax of a story that had been building up for far too long. I reached our building, took a deep breath, and walked up to our door. My hand was shaking a bit as I unlocked it. The apartment was quiet. I stepped in, trying to make as little noise as possible. There she was, in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, completely unaware of my return. She looked up, startled, as I walked in. "Kenneth, what are you doing here? I thought you were." Her voice trailed off as she saw the look on my face. "Surprised to see me?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. The look on her face, Reddit, it was a mix of shock, fear, and something else, guilt maybe. It was hard to read. But one thing was clear, she hadn't expected me, and that's exactly what I wanted. "Kenneth, what's going on? Why are you looking at me like that?" she stammered, setting her wine glass down. "We need to talk, Melissa. It's about time we had a real conversation," I said, my heart racing but my voice calm. And there we were, standing in our living room, the stage set for a confrontation that had been brewing for far too long. The air was thick with tension, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. So, Reddit, this was the moment of truth. The moment I'd been preparing for. Stay tuned, because what came next was a conversation I'll never forget.
Hey Reddit, Kenneth here again. The moment had arrived, the confrontation I had been both dreading and eagerly anticipating. My heart was racing as I stood there in our living room facing Melissa. This was it, the moment of truth.
Melissa, we need to talk about your meetings, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes widened slightly, a hint of panic flickering across her face. What meetings? I don't know what you're talking about, Kenneth, she replied, her voice a mix of confusion and defensiveness. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, but I knew I had to keep it in check. I'm talking about the meetings you've been having with other men, Melissa, the ones you've written about in your diary. I watched her closely, looking for any sign of her crumbling facade. Her face turned pale. My diary? You read my diary? She gasped, her voice rising. That's private. You had no right. I was ready for this, the deflection, the outrage. I think I had every right when it concerns our marriage, I countered firmly. I found it by accident, but what I read. Melissa, how could you? She started pacing, her hands wringing together. Kenneth, you're misunderstanding things. It's not what you think. They're just fantasies, nothing real. I haven't cheated on you. But I was prepared. Fantasies? Is that why I found receipts for hotels, charges for dinners at places we've never been together? Is that why you've been so distant lately? Her eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape. Kenneth, please, you're blowing this out of proportion. I love you. I would never do anything to hurt you. The denials, the gaslighting, it was all there. But I had one more card to play. Melissa, I followed you one evening. I saw you with him. I saw the way you were together. The color drained from her face. There was a long, heavy silence. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she said, You followed me?
Yes, Melissa. I needed to know the truth, and now I do. My voice was calm, but inside, I was a storm of emotions.
The room was thick with tension. Melissa sat down, her posture deflated, the fight gone out of her. Kenneth, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Sorry. The word echoed in my mind. Was it enough? Could it ever be enough? So there we were, Reddit, in the ruins of our marriage, surrounded by the debris of lies and betrayal. The confrontation I had imagined so many times had unfolded, but the feeling of victory I had expected was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was just emptiness, a hollow realization that things would never be the same again. Stay tuned, folks. The story doesn't end here. The aftermath of that confrontation led me down paths I never expected to walk. Hey Reddit, Kenneth back again. After that confrontation, I thought I'd feel a sense of relief, maybe even victory. But all I felt was a crushing weight of reality sinking in. Our marriage, which I had believed to be built on love and trust, was now in shambles. Here's how I dealt with the fallout. In the days following our confrontation, our apartment became a silent battlefield. Melissa and I moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking. The air was heavy with unspoken words and lingering resentment. She tried to initiate conversations a few times, probably to explain or apologize, but I wasn't ready to hear any of it. My bold and unforgiving nature was at the forefront, leaving no room for her excuses. I spent long hours staring out the window, watching the city move while my own life felt stuck in a standstill. My mind kept replaying the confrontation, her admissions, and the years of deception. Anger and betrayal battled with the remnants of love I still felt. It was a confusing mix of emotions that I struggled to process. During this time, I leaned heavily on my friend Mike. He was my sounding board, letting me vent, offering advice, or sometimes just sitting in silence with me. His support was invaluable. But as the days passed, the practicalities of our situation started to demand attention. We couldn't continue living like this, in a constant state of tension and avoidance. I began to think about separation, the logistics of it, the inevitability of it. It was a tough pill to swallow, the end of a relationship I had invested so much in. One evening, I finally broke the silence. Melissa, we need to talk about what comes next. My voice was steady, but inside, I was anything but calm. We sat down, two people who had once been inseparably in love, now negotiating the terms of our separation. It was surreal, discussing who would move out, how we would divide our things, and what this meant for our future. Melissa seemed resigned, a stark contrast to her usual fiery self. Maybe she too had accepted the reality of our situation. The decision was made. I would stay in the apartment, and she would move out. We agreed to keep things as amicable as possible, for the sake of the years we had shared. But as practical as we tried to be, the emotional undercurrent was hard to ignore. This was more than just a change of living arrangements. It was the end of a chapter in our lives. In the following weeks, Melissa moved her things out. Each item she took felt like a piece of our life together being removed. It was a tangible reminder of the impermanence of relationships, of how quickly things can change. So there I was, Reddit, left in an apartment that once felt like a home, now just a space filled with memories. The fallout from Melissa's betrayal and our confrontation had led me here alone, trying to piece together what to do next. It was a period of reflection, of rebuilding, and most importantly, of healing. Stay with me, folks. The journey isn't over yet. The path to healing and moving forward was a road less traveled, with its own set of twists and turns. After the fallout of the confrontation and dealing with the immediate aftermath, it was time to face the future. The path to resolution was not just about putting legal and logistical pieces in place. It was also about emotional healing and rediscovering who I was without Melissa. First things first, I had to tackle the legal and practical aspects of our separation. It was a tedious and sometimes painful process, dealing with lawyers, diving into the nitty-gritty of who gets what, and signing papers that officially marked the end of our marriage. Each signature felt like closing a chapter, a mix of sadness and relief. I was saying goodbye to a significant part of my life, but I was also opening the door to new possibilities. During this time, I did a lot of reflecting. I thought about my relationship with Melissa, trying to understand where things went wrong. I realized that while her betrayal was the breaking point, there were signs of trouble long before the diary. We had become more like roommates than partners, comfortable, but not truly connected. I had to acknowledge my part in that. But dwelling on the past wasn't going to help me move forward. So I started planning for the future. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects that challenged and engaged me. I reconnected with old friends, went out more, and even picked up new hobbies. I started cycling, something I had always wanted to do, but never got around to. It was liberating, feeling the wind against my face, the road stretching ahead, much like my life. Mike was a constant presence, encouraging me to get out and live. "You're in control now, Ken. Make the most of it," he would say, and he was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in the driver's seat of my life. I made decisions based on what I wanted, not what was expected of me or what was comfortable. Through this journey, I learned a lot about myself. I realized that I'm stronger than I thought, capable of overcoming betrayal and heartbreak. I discovered the importance of self-care, of looking after my own emotional and mental well-being. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that it's okay to let go, to move on from things that no longer serve you. So there I was, Reddit, at the end of a long and tumultuous road. The pain of the past was still a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was moving forward, one step at a time, building a life that was all about me and my choices. Stay tuned for the final update. Hello again, Reddit. Kenneth here for one last update. It's been a journey, hasn't it? From the moment I found Melissa's diary to this point, where I'm typing out what feels like the final chapter of a long, turbulent saga. So let's dive in. The divorce is finalized now. It's strange to say it out loud, I am no longer Melissa's husband. The end of our marriage was a turning point, a definitive closure to a significant part of my life. It was hard, one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was necessary. It marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new in my life, on my terms. Reflecting on this entire experience, I've learned a lot. I learned about resilience, the kind that's forged in the fires of betrayal and heartbreak. I discovered strength I never knew I had, the kind that comes from picking yourself up when your world falls apart. And I learned about forgiveness, not necessarily for Melissa, but for myself. Forgiving myself for not seeing the signs, for being a part of a failed marriage. It's been a process, but I'm getting there. As for my hopes for the future, they're brighter than I ever thought possible in the midst of my ordeal. I've started to reimagine my life, exploring possibilities that were once just distant thoughts. I've been traveling more, something I always wanted to do but never got around to. I've visited places I'd only seen in pictures, met new people, experienced different cultures. It's been eye-opening and incredibly liberating. I've also dived back into the dating pool, slowly but surely. I'm not rushing into anything, just enjoying meeting new people and experiencing new connections. I'm more cautious now, more aware of what I want and what I don't want in a relationship. It's a learning curve, but an exciting one. But the most significant change has been within me. I've embraced a new perspective on life, one that values the present, cherishes genuine connections, and looks forward to the future with optimism. I'm more in touch with who I am, what I want in life, and how I want to live it. So, Reddit, here I am. A man who went through one of the toughest times in his life and came out the other side stronger and more self-aware. It wasn't easy, but it was a journey worth taking. I've found closure, I've embraced my new life, and I'm excited about what the future holds. Thank you all for following my story, for your advice and your support. It's been an incredible comfort to share this journey with a community of strangers who became a part of my story. Here's to new beginnings and a future full of possibilities. Signing off, Kenneth.
To the outside world, I may smile or look as if all is well, but I've been through a lot, and it had all been my fault. You see, I had an affair with my husband's boss, and my husband found out and went after my only family seeking revenge. Before you all come for me, which is fair and fine, my husband had no right going after my mother for something I did. It was me that had slept with his boss. Why did he have to go for my mother? Hi, Redditors, I had an affair with my husband's boss. I didn't know what had come over me to propel me to do that, but I had done it. And it hadn't been a one-time thing. I can't say it had been the devil. That would be an added lie. I might have started it to probably spite my husband. No, this whole situation had started because I had been unhappy with his situation at work. My husband had worked his butt off. He was deserving of a promotion. So I had approached his boss at work. Well, I didn't know that would come back to bite me in the face. My husband had been beyond livid. And a fight started up between the two of us that lasted for more than a week. According to him, I had no right to interfere with his doings at work, and his colleagues now saw him as a sissy. How that was my fault was something I still struggled to understand till this day. I had just been looking out for him because I knew how hard he worked to please his boss. I knew how hard he had worked to be able to at least make the cutoff for the promotion at his workplace. Heck, I had always been the receiving end of his frustration whenever a project hadn't gone well or something wasn't adding up or was amiss. But my husband hadn't gotten where my concern had stemmed from. To him, I had insulted his pride by going to confront his boss. And it's not even as if I'd had a physical fight with his boss. I had just had a little chat with him. Here's how it had happened. It was his workplace annual couples retreat for workers so they could get to know each other and their families. I had been invited as my husband's plus one. If I had known it would start this whole cycle of events, I would have stayed home. Well, my husband and I got there when the party was already underway, with people mingling about in my husband's workplace lobby. It was like a normal office day, but with drinks and chips and outsiders, I think. Well, what had I known? Through the party, I noticed my history kept trying to meet the E of his boss to introduce us. Note at this point, I had thought my husband's boss was the devil's spawn. I hadn't known I would share my bed with the devil's spawn out of spite for my husband. However, through the course of the party, my husband's boss didn't even so much as glance his way. And that added to my anger. When my husband's boss finally deemed it worthy to come our way, was when I had gone to fetch a punch by myself and he just happened to pass by. And as promiscuous as men are, you can guess what happened next. He had the audacity to ask if I was at the party alone, when there was a huge rock sitting on my ring finger and my husband had been doing everything to get his attention. So I told him my mind and mentioned how hard my husband works to be able to make him richer and whatnot. It was uncalled for, but I had raised my voice so loud at him that it had garnered so much attention. From that day, my husband became so cold and emotionally unavailable towards me. At first, I had tried to apologize, to make everything right. I even went to his boss to apologize. He doesn't know about this, but yeah. I had done that in an effort to right my wrongs. I had even hosted him to a romantic dinner, something he hadn't done ever since he started fighting for a promotion in his office. Through the dinner, it was like I was talking to a statue who could only grunt out replies and sometimes not even reply to me. I mean, the straws had been gathering at this point and the camel's back was bordering on breaking at this moment. But I took it in as a good wife who had understood the frustrations of her husband. Was there anything wrong in what I had done? Anyway, the dinner didn't work, and what I did next got me more than just the silent treatment from my husband. I offered to help him get a new job, one of the biggest mistakes I had made in my marriage. A total mistake offering a man who loved to think of himself as the head of the family. You see, I was well-to-do and could pull a few strings to get him a high-status job. I wasn't complaining, and I wanted to do it. I might have even done once or twice without him knowing, but he hadn't accepted the job offers. However, I hadn't known he would take me suggesting to offer him a job as a death sentence. In his words, he had said he would rather die than give me bragging rights over his life. It seemed I hadn't known my husband after all. I had no idea whom I had married. Can you believe it? Before I delve in deeper to my experience on what led me to cheat on my husband, I want to give you all a little backstory about myself, my husband, and how we met. My name is Nora, and I'm 28 years old. My husband's name is Michael, and he's 28 years old. We had met 4 years ago. My husband's college frat had thrown a Halloween party, and I had followed a friend to go. I met my husband because we had both won Best Costume that night. And funny thing, we had matched through some weird twisted string of fate. I had gone as Daphne, he as Fred. That was how we had hit it off. We found out we were both in our second year and became close friends during that time. I had fallen for his charisma and the fact that he wasn't hitting on me because I was already wealthy off pocket. Most of the boyfriends I'd had before him had known I came from money and wanted to reap where they hadn't sown. You all needed to witness how they told me off when I broke it off with them. One had even called me a vain witch. So when I had been getting to know my husband, he hadn't shown those tendencies. Then we started dating a year later, and I introduced him to my family, and I had been right. I hadn't really been a great judge of character in my early adulthood, but I had been glad that I had done the right thing with my husband. We got married once we were done with college, and my husband got a job with his company without my help or the backing of my family. It had been nice watching him work from the scratch to provide for me as his little family. It had been more than nice, actually, but ever since the promotion hunt began, my marriage had turned into a nightmare. One I couldn't cope with anymore, so I had done what I had to do, not sleep with his boss. That came later. The main thing that had had my husband raise his voice and threaten to leave the marriage was when I had gone to see his boss to apologize for the fuss I had caused at the party. I had just wanted to offer an olive branch to his boss to see if maybe he would consider my husband for the promotion position, so I at least could have peace of mind. No. However, that seemed to have irked the life out of my husband, that I got a serious reprimand from him. On that day, I had never seen my husband act that way since I had known him. He was shouting, literally yelling and scattering things around the house and blaming me for all his problems. The words he had said to me wasn't something I could ever utter to someone in my life. They had been vulgar and demeaning and had me wondering how I had made the wrong choice in someone's character once again. Had he been hiding this side all along? How well did I truly know who I had married? I know you all would be thinking my husband shouting a few vulgar and demeaning words at me shouldn't be a reason enough for me to go and start having an affair with his boss. I didn't mean to, though. It had just happened, but I would be truthful and say my husband's demeaning words every night had been a push. Yep, you read right. Every night. My husband demeaned me ever since I had apologized to his boss. He had called me names, mummy's little girl and such, until I was pushed to leave the house because I couldn't take it anymore. I really couldn't. The day I had left the house for my husband to deal with his problems was the day I was pushed to drink. This was another mistake I regretted making. I should have just gone to my mother's place, but no, I had gone to drink away my frustrations with my husband. And I'm sure you guys can guess what happened next. My husband's boss happened next. Of all the bars in Manhattan, it was the one I had gone to nurture my wounds that the major cause of my problems decided to show up at. Talk about the devil. Of course he had to know who I was. That had to be the only reason he had approached me, and in my drunken haze, I had told him I found him handsome. Never drink alcohol, guys. It led to bad decisions. Bad decisions like following my husband's boss home for the night. Maybe I had done it to spite my husband. I admit to that before you all come for me. But someone should be able to understand my point of view. My marriage had already been ruined at that point. So I followed my husband's boss because in my head, my husband and I were over. These had been all my drunken thoughts. Thoughts that I would come to regret. I slept with my husband's boss. I had shared the same bed and exchanged human fluids with someone my husband looked up to at work. Oh my. This was what dawned on me the next morning when I woke up to my husband's call asking me to come home that he was sorry. It was already late. The deed had already been done. Do you guys think I should have told my husband then and there? Update 2. Well, back to narrating my experience. There was really nothing you all's advice could have done because the deed had already happened. I just wanted to know if you guys had been following. After the worst mistake of my life, I went back to my husband's house with guilt choking me to the brim, but I couldn't tell him. I know I had said I already saw my marriage as over, but those had just been the influence of alcohol. I didn't want my husband to leave me. I didn't want my marriage to end. It was one of the handful of things I had gotten right in my short life. I didn't want that ruined. And who hadn't made a cheating mistake before in their marriage? Even a look at another person that wasn't your spouse could be considered cheating. All of us married folks had cheated based on that line alone. So, I couldn't tell him. That would ruin my marriage for sure. I got back home and lied that I had been with my mother for the night. From then on, my husband became the one doing the apologizing. He would get me my favorite treats, take me to the salon, get me whatever it is I wanted. It was like my honeymoon all over again, and I was enjoying it. We talked, we laughed, we played games, and we had dinner together. It was like the quarrel that led to me making the mistake had never happened. It was like a lapse in time and a lapse in my judgment. The baby girl treatment was so beautiful to experience, but the guilt didn't allow me to enjoy it. It was choking, and I had no idea what to do at the time except go with the flow. That's exactly what I did, or that's what I should have done. However, I had dug a grave and had fallen so far into it. Tell me why I had gone back to my husband's boss. No, you don't need to tell me why. I was stupid, that was why, and I had ran back to my husband's boss at the smallest inconvenience. After the haze of my husband's apology phase was over, his frustrations with work and the stress over the office promotion started all over again. And once more, I had been the brunt of it. So I had run to the cause of the problem. My husband's boss had invited me for a drink, and I had told myself I wouldn't go. I wanted to work on my marriage, LOL. The irony. I went. I accepted the drink invitation and went over to my husband's boss place, under the delusion of going to just talk. As you can already guess, we did more than just talk. And this continued whenever my husband's problems became tedious for me to bear. My husband's boss treated me like a person. My husband treated me like a tool to relieve his stress. This time, I knew for sure my marriage was over, and I didn't want to revive it anymore. The problem I had at the moment was telling my husband I wanted a divorce without him finding out the reason behind it. I didn't really want to hurt him. Our problems aside, he had been the first man I had dated that I had actually loved and married, but we weren't working out. I was a soft girl, and I had tried my best in trying to fix his problems, but he had turned it all against me. I couldn't deal with that anymore. I had done all in my power, and now I just wanted to skedaddle. I tended to do that with any glimpse of stress. The affair with his boss, I didn't mean for that to happen, but you can't help who you sleep with, right? You fall for who you fall for. Wrong time and wrong place, but we can't all get it right with the details. Not that I had fallen for my husband's boss. No, I just didn't love my husband anymore for me to be able to cheat on him so freely. That had been my reasoning, and then I decided to end the affair with my husband's boss and also end my marriage. At this point, I don't even know if I was okay, because I wanted to end my marriage without trying to battle out our demons. I had to at least try with therapy. Maybe the feelings would come back and my husband would be able to get his own feelings back under control, and all would be well. So that's the route I took. Instead of confessing to my husband about the affair with his boss or ending my marriage, I decided to end the affair with his boss and register us for therapy. Well, fate had another plan for me. I wasn't superstitious or anything like that. Heck, if you had told me this was the turn my life would take after having an affair with my husband's boss, I wouldn't have believed you. But my life took a turn, a terrible turn at that. My husband's boss didn't allow me to slip from his grasp easily. I was really a terrible judge of character. The day I had gone to end our affair, My husband's boss said if I was going to do that, I should expect that my husband would lose his job immediately, and our affair would come out into the open. He basically threatened me, and I couldn't do anything about it or risk everything going south. I couldn't confess to my husband or he would lose his job because he would definitely go and confront his boss, and I was going to lose my marriage at the end. If I ended the affair, it was still bound to have the same outcome. There was no way out for me. I was toast. A badly burnt toast. So I didn't do anything. I continued the affair and tried to work on my marriage without confessing to my husband. On the bright side, thanks to my affair with my husband's boss, my husband got the promotion he so badly wanted. Yep, it had been a gift, a sacrifice on my part. Everything was finally going well. My husband was happy with his promotion, my secret was kept, nothing was going to go wrong. Lol. I had never been so wrong in my life. My world came to an end when my husband got his hands on security footage of me walking into a hotel with his boss's hand on the small of my waist. I don't know how that had happened. I averted the situation, of course, but that was the beginning of his suspicions. Every time my phone pinged with a text in the night, my husband's eyes would become trained on me. And my husband's boss wasn't helping my situation. He became very annoying and demanding. From calls and late-night texts, he started demanding, I leave my house in the middle of night to come over to his place to see him, or risk my secret coming out in the open. I was being torn in two at the moment. My husband was going to find out. Well, my husband found out, he found out, and everything I thought would happen in retribution happened. There was a big fight in his workplace, which led to him getting fired, and his boss threatened to never write him a good review letter. Everything had just happened so fast that I couldn't keep track of it all. What I had known at that moment was that my marriage was over for certain, and my husband was going to kick me out of the house, and he was going to tell all our friends that I had cheated. That's what I had expected to happen in the coming days after my secret was out in the open. In fact, that was what I had known was bound to happen, but once again, I was proven wrong. I was proven so wrong. The coming days after my husband confronted his boss over my affair had been the most silent days ever. My husband didn't even pretend like I was living in the same house with him. I counted the number of times I had passed by him, and he hadn't even done like a speck of dust had been raised. The silence was as brutal as the guilt that had eaten me up from not telling him. While I got used to the silence, however, it was not for long before things changed up again. I kept expecting him to rant and rake and throw me out of the house, but my husband kept doing the opposite. It was scary. From the silent treatment, he progressed to the baby girl treatment. Remember when I said he had acted up from his frustrations from work and had just come home all of a sudden and began treating me like it was our honeymoon? That was the scenario at this moment. He started up again, buying me gifts, takeouts, little heartwarming items. But he wasn't talking to me. He'll just lay them out on the table before going out or going to lock himself up in the guest bedroom. I had no idea what to make of it, and if I tell you, I wasn't scared, I was lying, because I was scared out of my pants. I didn't dare talk to him out of fear of unleashing the beast. I was of the notion that maybe he had seen my point of view without me explaining it to him. I had consulted my friends and asked them for help hypothetically. I didn't tell them about the cheating part, the fact that I'd had an affair with his boss. No, I wouldn't live that down. So I had just told them that I had done something wrong and needed to right it. Something along the lines of, if they were in my shoes, what would they have done? Sort of like I'm asking you guys. Well, they advised me to talk it out with him, and communication is the key, blah, blah. Yeah, it's not like that's something I didn't know. I knew the oldest trick in the book, but it wasn't that easy. The person I had married wasn't that easy to communicate with, especially when I had done something as drastic as this. He could definitely end me if I even breathed the same air. Luckily, I didn't. I didn't have to, because he started talking to me again. Yeah, I was as confused as you all are right now when my husband uttered his first word to me after finding out that I'd had an affair with his boss. And it had been a question on whether my mother still ran our family company. I had been totally surprised and still confused as to why he wanted that information. I got my answer a few days later. Apparently my husband went to confront my mom. Yep, he had stooped to that level, and it was unbelievable, like I could understand him confronting me or something. Heck, he could have done just that, but my mom. What had my mom got to do with it? Well, I soon found out. After my husband had gone over to my mom's place of work and threatened hell on earth, he had come back to throw my things out of the house. He hadn't even waited for me to gently pack. Nope. He had thrown my things out onto the driveway like the very sight of them had him on fire. I guessed the honeymoon phase was over, and what I had done was just dawning on him. At least I was no longer confused as to what was going to happen with my husband. I was going to ask my family lawyer to draft up the divorce, and then I would go on with my life. But it seemed my husband had other plans. About a week after my husband threw me out and I packed my things back to my family house, divorce papers arrived in the mail. That was the beginning of chaos with my husband. After the divorce papers came in, the threats followed suit almost immediately. My mother had inherited our family's plastics business after my father and was a major shareholder in the company. This was what I had meant when I said my family was well-to-do. However, she had people who had invested majorly into the company from the days my dad was alive. I had no idea what to make of that since I had no interest whatsoever in towing the family line of business. But it had been something she had been drilling into my head since I was in high school. According to her, they were people watching and waiting for our downfall, so I should always be on my best behavior. It was as if we were in a drama or a soap opera, with the way she had said it. But I refused to believe people didn't have better things to do with their lives than watch someone else's. My family wasn't keeping up with the Kardashians, so I paid no mind to what she had said back then. Not that there was anything I had ever done that could bring disgrace to my family. I was Miss Goody Two-Shoes until this saga with my husband. Somehow along the line of us dating, I had probably told him how my mother was big on keeping a healthy public image and whatnot. I didn't know he was going to use it against me. I had no idea that in the coming future, he would make me regret ever telling him anything about my life or knowing him in the first place. And he truly did make me regret ever knowing him. My husband decided to use my mother's weakness against her by threatening to tarnish our image to every news and media company he could find. Apparently, he had gathered evidence of me having an affair with his boss and decided to use it to set himself up for life. In his own words, I owed him after making him go crazy and lose his job. He had said it was the least I could do. Can you imagine the audacity of that man? He didn't know everything I'd ever done in our marriage had been for him. If it wasn't for him, it was because of him, and he thought he had the right to say, to even think, I owed him. Men truly had no shame. My husband truly had no shame. Heck, I had even offered to help him procure a job when the other one wanted to eat him alive, and he had turned me down only for him to resort to this. This stupid tactic, blackmailing my mother to make up for his shortcomings. Man, I was beyond enraged. I was livid, if there was a better word to describe how I felt. I was ready to have him arrested after I signed the divorce papers, because no one made a nuisance of my family like that. I thought I had known who I had married, but I couldn't have had stupid plastered on my forehead any more than this. My mother was all for keeping things under the wraps about my divorce and the affair. I didn't mind. I really didn't care if people found out I had an affair with my husband's boss. I was telling whoever cared to listen that I had tried my best in my marriage. I had done what I had thought was best for my husband. He had gotten the promotion he wanted, hadn't he? Even though it had come at the expense of me sharing my bed. And I was already so deep that the only way to come out had been to hurt him. Sure, I had hurt him either way, but I never wanted things to reach that point in my life. The first time was a mistake. The second and third times had been out of frustration and someone to talk to, and the rest times hadn't been of my own will. I know I shouldn't be justifying cheating on my husband with his boss, but I need someone to understand my situation. I truly hadn't meant to, but if I hadn't done it, when would the man I had married show his true colors like this? When I'd popped out his kids? When I didn't have anyone to fall back on? I really needed to know how to be able to judge people's character on the first meeting. Was there a class someone could take for that? Well, I signed the divorce papers and handed it over to my lawyer, not wanting to have anything to do with my husband anymore. Absolute good riddance. My mother paid off his blackmail money, and I knew it wasn't a matter of time before he came back for more. Once a snake, always a snake. One could never hide their true colors forever. However, before my husband squandered the money my mother had paid him, He had asked for a meeting between me and my lawyer to finalize the divorce. I didn't want to see the bastard again, but I wanted to watch his face as I threw back everything I had ever done for him in our marriage and how he had treated me like garbage. And I also wanted to know the reason he had proposed a meeting in the first place. Of course, as you could all guess, my husband proposed a meeting to gloat and call me all sorts of wicked names you could come up with within your vocabulary. I had just sat back and watched the person I had said I do to diminish my whole life with his words. It had been painful because I truly loved him, and even though I had said I had done it out of spite at the beginning, I realized it's one of the stupid things you do to help the people you love. Well, something along those lines, but I was greatly disappointed because I remembered how excited I was on our wedding day. I remembered how I couldn't wait to end the day with his ring and his name as mine. I had been giddy on my wedding day because I was so sure I was getting married to my best friend and the love of my life. I sat back at his lawyer's office and just couldn't believe I had been so wrong with a decision that was meant to be for life. In the face of problems, my husband showed his true colors. When he was done, trust me, I wasn't one to sit back and let someone hurl over me. I told him exactly what I thought of him. I told him how I had always been there for him in our one-year disaster marriage. I told him how it all began and how all I wanted to achieve was easing his stress. Meanwhile, I knew if the situation was turned around, he wouldn't have done anything about it from the looks of things. He came at me that doesn't justify my sleeping with his boss, and of course I knew that. It was one of the things that was eating deep at me. I apologized for that, and there was nothing in the world that could compare to how sorry I was. But I told him I was glad it happened because without it, our marriage was still a disaster bound to happen. He had never appreciated anything I had ever done for me. He only tried to apologize when it finally dawned on him that he had been a very terrible person. And that's when he would try to buy my gifts and stuff I could very well buy for myself. I told him all that, and apparently my husband couldn't take it from the way he rained insults down on me and my family. Well, that didn't matter to me. I had said my piece. I lied. I found out how much damage my enraged husband could do to my mother and the family company. Apparently, he wasn't blushing when he had said he had evidence of me having an affair with his boss. It was like a dream, like I was living in a fairy tale that had turned to a nightmare. Luckily, it had just been within our family, but unfortunately it was a dent to my mother's name, as I was dubbed the wayward daughter who went about sharing my bed with any available man when I had a husband. I had fielded calls from every side of my family on the morning that my ex-husband had decided to release the news. I hadn't known how he had done it, but he had sent evidence to every male member in my family. As a result of this, those who had been eyeing my mother's position reared their ugly heads and started questioning her position as a chairman if she couldn't train her daughter right. My ex-husband had timed his revenge perfectly, and I had thought he was simply going to ask for more money. Lowell, I had underestimated him. It was then I understood what my mother had meant by we needed to maintain a healthy public image. I had thought there was never going to be a situation where her advice would come in handy, but I understood perfectly at that moment. I had failed her. The news of me cheating on my husband spread through my extended family quickly, and conspiracy theories started coming up as to whether my mother had done the same thing as me, because where else could I have gotten the trait from? It was so sad to watch my mother being torn apart by the backlash within our family. This was why I said I never wanted to get involved with things concerning my family. As a result of my disgrace, the group of major decision-makers in my family decided my mother was unfit to lead the company. All because I thought I was doing what was right for my husband, who had now put me in this mess. My mother was asked to vacate her position as the CEO and forced to retire. I know this was supposed to make me reflect on what I had done wrong, but it just made me hate men the more. From my ex-husband to his boss to my stupid uncles who thought my mother was their toy to discard at a whim. Well, this was how my ex-husband went after my husband because of the mistake I had made. If I could turn back the time I would go back to before I had provoked him, because that's what had led to all this. My mother had faced disgrace and retirement because of my decision. I didn't mean for that to happen. I had ruined her public image, the one she tried so hard to maintain. I had made a mistake that had cost my mother a position she loved, a position that had kept her close to my dad, according to her. I had learned my lesson big time with this. I hope as you read this, you didn't feel judgmental towards me because this could happen to anyone. A mistake could lead to a list of downfalls in your life. This is why, in whatever you do, you must choose right. Lol, don't be like me who thought I was doing the right thing but ended up causing a disaster in my life and my mother's. This might sound like a funny story experience. I wish that's how it was for me, so at least I could wipe off the disappointment from my mother's face whenever I see her. She still tries to mask it, but I see it. All in all, I hope you guys here get the sense to be a better judge of character. That's something I'm still learning, as it had put me in ruin from my experience. Well, that's it for me, Redditors. Bye.